Hello, and welcome to Health and Fitness Redefined. I'm your host, Anthony Amen. Join me today as we take a dive into the health and fitness, where we learn how to overcome adversity to pick out jurisdiction and see health and fitness in a whole new light. You probably saw today's title episode and you're like, oh my God, Anthony, that is not a health topic whatsoever. What are you doing? But I think it is important, like we do talk about alcohol quite frequently on the show, actually. I think every specific aspect of drugs should be involved. Figure out the good, the bad, the ugly. Maybe he's learned some information we never knew about. But before we jump into this episode, full disclosure, this is my cousin. So when we are chatting and going over things, we do know each other very well. So I am even more excited to bring you this episode. So without further ado, Paolo, welcome to the show. It's an absolute pleasure to have you.
Thank you for having me.
I already dropped the bomb and said that we are related by marriage already. So everyone now knows.
Right on. Yeah. So you're not going to take it easy on me then, basically.
Yes, that's exactly what I mean. Just because you're part of the family now doesn't mean I'm going to go easy on what I talk about.
Yeah, it's all stuff we've talked about before. The only difference now is there's a mic and an audience. So
Exactly. 1,000 people later, they're going to judge us for it. No, I'm teasing. But anyway, let's learn a little bit about, for at least the audience's sake, of what you do and how you got into the industry you're in now.
yeah, for sure. So I work on cannabis beverages full time. I'm the general manager of Cann, CANN. So Cann is the best selling cannabis beverage in the world. We've been around since 2019. And to date, we've raised over $50 million from actually some former athletes, but other celebrities. So Baron Davis, who played in the NBA for multiple years, was an all-star in the NBA, star at UCLA. LA high school legend is an investor in our company. So he believes in it. And then we also have Rosario Dawson, Gwyneth Paltrow specifically is really into health. She's an investor in the company as well. But before I joined Cann full time, I worked on the technology that allows cannabis extracts to go into liquid. And we'll definitely get into that, I'm sure, on this podcast. But I've been in the cannabis industry since 2016 here in California. Then it was medical only. Now it's recreational, which is very confusing because it's all the same plant, but it's just how we designate it in terms of the laws. And when I met you and met my wife, who is your cousin, I was working for PepsiCo at the time, which is the largest, obviously, food and beverage company in North America. So I have a background in beverage, and then I worked into cannabis, and now I work only on cannabis beverages.
It's funny how you kind of took the two things you did separately and just put it all together, which is good. I mean, you got a sense of both different worlds and brought it. So, what got you interested in cannabis in the first place?
That is a great question. So I abstained from cannabis and pretty much all drugs my entire life. Until I was 19, I started drinking alcohol. But the reason I stayed away from drugs is I was super into basketball when I was in high school and college. And I thought I grew up in the dare generation. I thought drugs were things that were toxic to your body and mind. And I believed everything that was told to me. But then I was sitting there around the age of 32, let's say it was 2014, and I saw a documentary called The Culture High. And this documentary had a lot of influential people saying a lot of convincing things, but one person specifically stood out. And funny story, he actually ended up becoming one of my clients. But the guy's name was Jason David, and he was a father, and he had a son that had epilepsy and was having a grand mal seizure 1 hour every day of his life since birth, and was taking over 23 prescription pills a day to combat those episodes. And he went to a dispensary in Oakland called Harborside and got CBD oil and started treating his son with CBD oil, which CBD oil, people listening don't know, it's CBD is a compound that's within the cannabis plant. And then the oil is the extraction of it, obviously. And once he started treating his son with the CBD oil, he weaned him all off of all but 3 of the pills, and he stopped having the seizures. And I met the son. The son is now functioning and walking around. And then the dad ended up opening up a dispensary and then became my client. But before that happened, I just then got curious to research cannabis because you heard there's no medical benefit at all with cannabis. and which is why it's a federal Scheduled 1 drug, which is designated by the DEA, which says it has no medicinal value. And just for some context, cocaine is not a Schedule 1 drug. So cocaine does have some medicinal value according to our government. But how does it have no medicinal value if a father is crying on a camera saying how it helped his kid with epilepsy? So then I started researching not only the different compounds in cannabis and the various benefits it could do for certain people, but also the history of prohibition. And that's really what got me fired up about it. Is I've thought a lot of the reasons the laws were made were due to some racism, due to some private interest. A lot of it's just speculation, I guess, but it made no logical sense why they made the product so illegal. And at the same time, I was working for PepsiCo, and it's a huge corporation. But before I really started journeying into how can I get into cannabis professionally, I just got curious enough to finally experiment and try it on myself. So I got some cannabis flower, the part you grind and smoke, and I researched how to make my own edible because I didn't want to put smoke in my lungs. Tried it out, got way too high, but the effects just it was really weird effect, and I took way too much the first night and started to get a little anxious and paranoid. But before that, I did a lot of research on how it's going to treat me and the different side effects, so to speak. And you can't overdose on cannabis, so I just told myself you're not going to die. Wrote it out, and I just kept experimenting and dialing it back. And after a while, I just liked it, just like I like coffee. And then with more time, I really started to dial in, like when I took it, why I took it. And then I just said, you know what? People have the rights to educate themselves on this plant, the truth about the plant, and make their own decision. So then I just started to get passionate about it from kind of an activism standpoint. But instead of going all in on activism, I just, working at Pepsi, I was also looking to build something and sell something I could be more passionate about. So that's when I started researching various cannabis companies. In 2016, it was a different world in terms of the business sense of it than it is today. But I did find a company in San Francisco that was venture capital backed and had a very professional looking brand. And I sent a message to the CEO of that company, went up to San Francisco where your cousin, my wife, which was then my girlfriend at the time, was living around that area, and started talking to them and just went all in, sold my house, quit Pepsi, joined industry, and a lot of things happened. And now talking to you today about cannabis beverages.
It's a great story how it's not just, I think what most people kind of depicted. I was 15 years old and I got peer pressured into smoking a joint, and
No, I thought those were the losers. I thought that for the longest time. And there are people that abuse it, don't get me wrong, but there are people that abuse donuts, as you know, and you get obese, and cardiovascular disease still kills a lot more people than cannabis ever will.
yeah, so let's kind of do a quick overview breakdown before we jump into specifics of cannabis. I want to add some familiarities and talk about some positives of things that you talked about. You mentioned working, which I obviously knew at Pepsi Cola. And one of the similarities I kind of put together right in my head was they made cannabis a Schedule 1 drug with no medicinal benefits. But yet the company you worked for, who's one of the number one beverage companies, probably one of the most dangerous things we could put in our body. And that's $1 for a liter on a shelf. And they want you to drink that and take that. And I don't need to sit here and dive into how bad soda is for you because we've done that plenty of times on the show. But it's just a good example of why sometimes you just don't really trust what they tell you, like the FDA and CDC are putting out. And that kind of jumps into the history of why cannabis was banned. And I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but what from I've learned is that cannabis was used to make paper and as well as clothing material, the hemp from it. And it was a lot cheaper than using wood, but it wasn't grown in the climate in the US. So the clothing industry and paper industry came together and wanted to ban the use of it because it was hurting their industry, and lobbied to make it federally banned as a Schedule 1 drug so no one could be allowed to grow it, use it to make any kind of material here in the States.
Yeah, yeah. So that's kind of what I was getting at when I said private interest earlier. And we can definitely get off on this tangent and go down this rabbit hole, but working in this industry has changed my stance on politics, because there a lot of times there is special lobbying interests that don't have the the heart of taking care of our citizens in mind. They just have their own personal interests in mind. So that is one of the theories and one of the reasons why it was banned. And it's a shame, because when you talk about the textiles and clothing and all that, we're just talking about a commodity crop, right? And somebody who wants to just clothe themselves efficiently and cheaply so that they have enough money to come back to their family should have the right to do that. And then they demonize something that could help and benefit a lot of people, just to make sure that that's made illegal so that their own private interests can benefit. And that, to me, and since you mentioned the PepsiCo angle as well, passion is a big thing that fuels my life. So that, to me, reversing that wrong fueled my passion. And then also, when I worked at Pepsi, I never pretended like I drank Mountain Dew or Pepsi to any of my customers at all. And they didn't care. They had people coming in there spending money on it, and that's what they cared about. And I'd want to do more than just make money. I want to make money too, but I want to make money by helping people and empowering them to make the best decisions for their individual nuanced lifestyles, rather than just saying this is banned because it's bad for everybody. And that's rarely the case with anything.
Yeah, I mean, look at you mentioned cocaine as a good example of not it's not being as federally targeted as marijuana is, which I think is ridiculous. And if you really want to pinpoint, and just that kind of as a last example, pain medicine, you're looking at oxycodone and all of that actually is way worse than any kind than marijuana will ever be. And this is my opinion. You want to talk about addiction that happened and the millions of people that have been affected that kind of spiraled into the heroin and fentanyl crisis that we are having now. Now, those are drugs that should be federally one banned, should be targeted, because one use wrong and you die. Like that's a whole new level. You can't. It's apples and oranges you're comparing there.
Yes, sir. Really, it's painful for me to talk about this, but I went to college in Southwest Virginia, so Appalachia, um, and that's where I started my career at Pepsi. So in that community, and my friends and people I love like family are still there. And I just caught up with one of my college roommates in Colorado last month in the summer here, and we talked about a lot of people we used to know, and both he's we're both I'm 41, he's 39. We already know people that have passed away from pills. And in that community too, there's a lot of obesity and there's a lot of poverty. So what really started to make me uncomfortable with working at Pepsi is Walmart was our biggest customer in that area. And a lot of people on that area are on food stamps, which there's no shame in that at all. But I don't know if you know this, you can buy soda on food stamps. So the first of the month, we had tremendous sales because people would come in and buy soda on their food stamps. And you look at these people, and they're not healthy people at all. And it's not to shame them or anything like that. They just grew up in that environment, and they were marketed to. And obviously, we know the pills are also ravaging those communities as well. So yeah, it's there's a lot of things that are legal and very accessible and marketed to our citizens, while cannabis at the same time is federally illegal. So just very illogical all around.
Yeah, and now let's kind of sort of break this back because we want to really target it on the topic right now. I mean, I know you and I know the difference, but I think just for educational purposes, what's the difference between cannabis, CBD, THC? Like, what gets you high? What doesn't? Just break all that down for us real quick.
Yeah, for sure. So cannabis is the plant, and then just think about an orange. Let's say orange is the plant, or the fruit, I should say. Um, yeah, so I'll back up a little bit further. The orange sits on a tree, cannabis is the plant, and then the flower of the plant is the part that people smoke and really get a lot of the compounds out of that give you different effects. And then just like within the orange, you can get vitamin C and fructose and all the other compounds in it. Within the cannabis flower, you have both CBD and THC, which you named, but there's also hundreds of other compounds, including the two groups of compounds are cannabinoids, where CBD and THC live. And then there's terpenes, which give the flower flavor, aroma, and there's some efficacy behind terpenes as well. terpenes are also in tea, they're in coffee, they're in plants, they're in chocolate. Um, but really, when the two most popular compounds in cannabis that people seek out are CBD and THC. Now, the term high, obviously, like maybe that needs some definition. What do you want to say high is? Well, let me ask you, what do you call high?
Comparable to drunk, not in a clear state of mind, basically.
Got it. So would you say caffeine gets you high?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, I agree with you on that one. So in my mind, CBD does get you high. You hear people say it doesn't, but CBD gives me this effect where I'm very aware of what's going on, so I'm functional. Like, I'm not going to tell anyone what to do, but you can still drive a car and operate a jackhammer on CBD probably. But I'm in this emotional state where nothing really kind of phases me. So somebody could be yelling in my face, and instead of like reacting like, "Whoa, buddy, what's your deal?" I'm like looking at the veins of their forehead and looking at their mouth and stuff like that, and just kind of processing it without reacting. THC gives me like euphoria, so it makes me very happy and giggly, uh, positive, but it also can put you in your own head where a lot of people get anxious off of it as a result. And maybe I do a time or two, but at this point, I've taken it so many times that I kind of know the ride I'm getting on, so I'm prepared for it, and it doesn't do that for me. But I talk in a lot of anecdotes, so I say this is what it does for me. Somebody else, it does the complete opposite effect sometimes, but we still need to do a lot more research on what the effects are for different people, both long and short term. And we've been robbed of that research because it's been illegal for so long. So unfortunately, I have to speak in anecdotes a lot more than I want to, but in general, CBD and THC are the ones we do have the two compounds we do have the most research around. And CBD, the top three reasons people take it are for anxiety, sleep, and pain. THC, it's for euphoria, getting over stress, and partying, giggling, let's say, socializing, stuff like that.
Which one do you feel like you're the most familiar with to talk about, the CBD or the THC side?
Both of them. I've worked with them both extensively.
All right, so I'd like to talk about the THC side a little bit first. And this is kind of where I'm sure we'll have some differentiating opinions out of it. So I can tell you from personal experience and from other people I've hung out with, THC is a drug. And to me, that's something that needs to be regulated to some extent because same reason as alcohol, which is legal, you have too much or you take it, it does impair you operating a motor vehicle. It does have psychological addicting effects to it, and it can cause long-term health problems. It's the same thing with cigarettes, alcohol. I mean, you kind of name it, it's there. So that's something that I would say I'm more against somebody using and saying it's overall healthy. I wouldn't put health on it. I would just say moderation. If you want to do it, fine. Just don't drive a plane or a car kind of deal.
Yeah, I mean, I don't. I don't necessarily disagree with any of that. I definitely think it should be regulated. Like you pointed out, alcohol is also regulated. Uh, I also would probably tend to agree that it's not necessarily a health product. Ideally, you don't need any cannabis in your life. You don't need any caffeine in your life. Ideally, you don't need any drugs in your life. But now, if we get people on THC instead of opioids, then we are reducing harm in their body. So that's why I still want people to have access to it. Doesn't mean just like sell it anywhere and sell it to a kid that walks up to your store. That's definitely not what I would advocate. Uh, it does need regulation, but it needs sensible regulation. And that's where we can really uh, define what that means.
Yeah, and sensible regulation is kind of where it's at, is understanding the effects of something. And like you said, I think the opioid example is the best one out there. If I took oxys, I shouldn't operate a motor vehicle.
Yeah.
If I took anything like that, is going to impair my ability to drive. Is going to overall be unhealthy. Like when when I had my concussion, for example, I was prescribed a ridiculous amount of oxycodone. Like they gave me enough pills to take every 4 hours for 3 weeks straight. Now, luckily, I hate taking pain medicine.
Me
So
too.
for me, I took it, I think, twice and that was only the first 2 days after, just once per day. But I felt so shitty on it. I was like, this is ridiculous. I'd rather be in pain. and I just refused to take it, and then just didn't. I just don't like it. I barely even take ibuprofen. So it's just, you need to learn to embrace pain. And that's something else I've talked about previously. It's more of your brain overreacting to something in your body. So you can take certain levels of it and you should be able to learn how to cope with it. But that's another story. But if we use THC as okay, here's a prescribed amount of it, take XYZ instead of opioids, and start people there, I think we'll see a lot better things in our future with it. And then it gives the ability to experiment and learn. So declassifying it from as a Schedule 1, but just using it more for medicinal benefits as just a extra instead of opioids.
I definitely agree with you there. Yeah, we still need to learn a lot more about it, but you know, like I said, one of the reasons people take CBD, for example, which, you know, maybe CBD, I'm not an expert in epilepsy at all. So if you do have epilepsy, obviously that's a lot of suffering going down. And CBD, in the most purest sense of the word, could have medicinal benefit for somebody like that. But now somebody who just takes it for anxiety, kind of what you're going off with pain, like I have a similar story to specifically what you said there. Like when I was 19, I fell on my back dunking a basketball on a concrete floor, and then I went to the doctor, and you know, I just want to make sure I didn't break anything. The pain was manageable. Without me asking, he prescribed me Lortab, which I didn't even know what that was, and I just got the prescription. I'm like, well, maybe it'll flare up and I'll need it. Then I was talking to one of my friends, and he said, "Did they give you pills?" Like all excited. I'm like, "Yeah, they did. Like no big deal." And he offered to buy them off of me, and I'm like, "What the? Why do you want to buy pills? Like that was weird." But I wanted money, and like I did. I was very naive, and I sold it to him, which, you know, now I feel super bad about that. Uh, but I wanted to feel the pain because I wanted to know if I was doing more damage to my body and during the healing process, you know. And so going back to what I was saying about anxiety, if you have anxiety, that's your body telling you you're worrying about something in your life that you should fix. You don't mask that anxiety by taking drugs. And again, I think cannabis are drugs, which that word could have some negative connotation about behind it, but I'm drinking drugs right now. This is caffeine because I slept like crap last night in this hotel I'm in LA. So it's not shaming anyone that takes drugs. It's just being mindful of why you're taking the drugs and knowing what you're putting in your body and knowing there's a positive, but there's also a trade off with some negative involved in it because this is going to dehydrate me. It's going to increase cortisol in my system, which isn't a good thing for me to do. But I'm doing that trade off because I'd rather have the energy so that I'm awake when I'm talking to you and your audience here. But yeah, you're right. We need to do more research. You need to talk to somebody who knows what they're talking about to make recommendations for your specific ailment, and you should work towards not ever depending on it or ever needing it. So I definitely agree, on the same page with you on all that.
Awesome. And then I want to jump in right into the CBD side, because this is something that's approached. I get approached, I gotta tell you, daily. Owning a gym, every freaking CBD rep and their mother shows up to try to get me to sell their products. I have, like, I'm right next to my desk, and here you go. Here's one right now. It's Pure Spectrum Invigorate. Oh, like, great.
Invigorate what?
Natural style, 500 milligrams of cannabis oil, and this is from like 4 years ago. It's totally expired. I used CBD on muscles because I have chronically tight muscles. I haven't felt one difference whatsoever, no matter how pure somebody tells me. And I just can't get behind anyone that tells me there's one specific thing that cures everything.
Yeah, it's not a
If someone
panacea.
said this pill will cure all your issues, it's going to take care of everything, I'm like, you're out of your mind. Go away from me. I don't care what it is.
Yeah, yeah. So when I was working on beverages, uh, there was other water-based products that I had a business opportunity to execute on. So the CBD craze is really interesting because with the inspiring stories about it curing kids with epilepsy, there's all these charlatans and greedy people that are trying to capitalize on that hype and say it's going to cure cancer in the world and all this stuff. So I'm not joking where I've seen things as ridiculous as like CBD toothpicks, CBD mattresses, but I personally made a CBD sex lube that was water based. Not me personally, like this is my product, but the company that made the sex lube wanted to do it because they thought CBD was hot and people would have bought it. I'm like, So I'm not going to name the company, but I'm in the meeting and there's the CEO, CMO, and the chief science officer for this company. And I said, you know what? My beverages are my specialty here. I don't know anything about sex lube. So why do you want to put CBD in sex lube? And they all kind of looked at each other. And then finally the CEO says, because we think it'll sell. So there's a lot of people that made stuff like what you held there and thought it would sell and they overhyped it. And it's a shame because now there are people who could benefit from CBD. Personally, I never felt anything on a topical application. I have on some CBD creams, but I think it's because of the other things that are in the cream, not because of the CBD itself. And CBD is just a buzzword that tries to sell it.
Yeah,
But
menthol, for example. Everyone says they feel something, and it's because of the menthol in it.
right, right. And so when you have a product and CBD is taking up a lot of the real estate, then that to me is you're just trying to hype up a buzzword versus building a brand that really delivers value to people. So here's Can, for example. This is our drink. This has CBD in it, but like none of the words you see that are big and upfront say anything about CBD. It's just a feature of the product. It's not like the star that you're trying to sell it there. So yeah, it should be just an ingredient, and the ingredient should have some functional benefit to deliver on what your brand is promising the customer.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And then what is exactly CBD? Just one more time so we can clarify it. Because I know a lot of
Yes.
people get overwhelmed and confused with this whole topic, especially I'm thinking like my parents, they have no idea what any of this is. So please explain.
Yeah, so CBD is a type of cannabinoid, just like THC is a cannabinoid. CBD is short for cannabidiol, uh, and then THC is short for tetrahydrocannabinol. So both of them are cannabinoids that are the compounds in the plant that have efficacy. And what is a cannabinoid? Think of them, they're like tiny messengers that interact with your body in a special way. And I hate to use like vague terms like that, but there's over 100 of them and we still don't know a lot of what they do, but they definitely have effects on how your mind and body feel.
Yeah, and it just clarification purposes, THC is more the one that everyone's thinking about 16-year-old smoking behind. It's giving those kind of dopey effects as
Correct.
opposed to CBD, which no one's sitting there lighting it up and going for the euphoria kind of aspect of it. But before we get into, because I really want to start diving into what specifically can is and everything, and talk about the different ways you can ingest, if there's a difference, different health benefits for the ways you can get introduce it into your body. Before that, I want to talk a little bit about our brand new company we just launched, Fsquared Consulting. It is FitBodies, FatWallets.com. Guys, we just started something that will blow your mind. I have partnered with a financial genius, and we are offering a product that is just not offered anywhere else. Fsquared Consulting is a company where we're going to combine my knowledge of health, fitness, and goal setting with Keith's knowledge of finances to teach you how to run your 401k. What the hell is the difference between an IRA 401k and a regular one? How do I get out of debt? How do I start saving for the future? How can I help create a portfolio of stocks to help make sure that I'm financially sound going forward? These are all questions we ask ourselves every day. Health and finances are things that are always on our minds. And you need people that know it like the back of their hands. That's why we have come together and have started this brand new company, Fsquared Consulting. Go check us out, FitBodies, FatWallets.com. That is FitBodies, FatWallets.com. We're ready to go, and we look forward to seeing you guys there. Anyway, let's go back into the different types of ingestion. So obviously everyone knows smoking. I think that's the bread and butter of kind of where it started. I know there's IV infusion now. I know there's
What, really?
drink. Yeah, the IV companies are getting in with CBD. It's crazy.
Oh
Um,
God.
there's drinks, there's topical, and there's more. There's food. So those, I think those are the big ones. I mean,
Uh,
maybe there's a little more out there, but
the only
what's
one
the
you,
difference?
sorry, the only one you missed there is vaporizing the oil. So
Oh, vapes. Darn it.
yeah, yeah,
Okay, I
yeah.
consider
So
that smoking. Sorry.
yeah, inhaling. No, that's fair. So yeah, there's you can smoke the flower where you have to dry the flower and then you grind it up and roll it in a joint or bong or whatever and smoke it. There's vaporizing the oil. So Actually, the oil is probably a good place to start. So to get the oil, you have to extract the oil from the plant. There's various different ways to extract it using solvents. You can actually just use a press like olive oil. That's considered a pure way to do it. And then once you have the oil, you can either vaporize it and inhale it, or you can put it into food. When you put it into food, it's a different effect on your body. It takes an hour to kick in. It creates compounds that are different than you get from smoking it. So it's more of a prolonged high, and it's more of a psychoactive high than smoking it. But what we do when we put it into the drinks is we have to take oil and put it into the drinks. And everybody listening to this, or I hope that went to science class, knows oil and water don't mix. So actually, that's how I got my start in drinks. Is I worked for a company that would emulsify the oil to disperse into beverages. So what you do there is emulsion basically just means a mixture of two things that don't naturally mix. So in our case, oil and water. Everyone has emulsions in their house, like salad dressing, where it separates and then you shake it up and now it's emulsified again, or natural peanut butter where the oil floats to the top. So what we do is we take that oil and you put it through either a microfluidizer, which is just basically a high pressure device that gets all that oil. Like oil just makes a big goblet clump, basically, in crude terms, so that layman can understand, and shoves it through a small hole and then breaks it up into tiny microscopic nano size oil droplets. And now they're very small, you can't even see them, and we have to encapsulate them with what are called surfactants. So surfactants have a head that is hydrophilic, meaning it likes water, and then have a tail that's hydrophobic. So then what happens is that small droplet of oil gets encapsulated 360 degrees. Picture like an M&M where the chocolate is the oil and then the candy shell is the surfactants encapsulating it. But that encapsulation seeks water. So you still have oil going into water, but now it's disperses evenly in the water and it's kind of suspended within that water matrix versus floating to the top. But the extra benefit of it being such a small droplet size of oil is instead of it taking an hour to kick in like oil would do if you eat it in an edible form, it kicks in like 5 to 15, 20 minutes, let's say. And actually, we actually, little side story there, but I actually had my blood veins tapped for an hour, not an hour, drawn on the hour for a day to measure the saturation level. So we actually see when you see the spikes and when it exits your body. And we quantified that it is a 5-10 minute onset, and then you feel the peak within 45 minutes. And the reason you feel it quicker is because that droplet is so small that the hypothesis is it penetrates your blood-brain barrier in the permeable skin under your tongue and in your gum lining. So it's more bioavailable than swallowing the oil. And then the extra benefit is we can put it in the beverage form factor, which is more approachable for the mass audience. So at the end of the day, the reason I got into cannabis beverages not only was because of my background at Pepsi, but I think it's going to be the most popular way to consume cannabis because it's predictable, it's precise. We know what it's going to do every time. Or like a joint is very unpredictable because we have thousands of cannabis strains right now. They all have different effects, and you can't really measure your dosing on a joint or vaporizing it. Or and edibles you can, but it's an hour onset, lasts longer. A drink is quick, easy, approachable to a lot of people, and you can mix it with other compounds in drinks to make it a functional beverage. So here's another drink I work on. This is a Thunder Pop. So this is a yerba mate base, and yerba mate is a tea that we drink in my home country of Brazil, which is now getting really popular in certain markets as a clean form of energy. So yerba mate has compounds in it that increase the dopamine levels in your brain. And dopamine is the compound you feel when you get that runner's high that a lot of people listening to this feel like. So you feel that energy, motivation, euphoria. So you have that in the yerba mate already. Yerba mate is great. Drink plain yerba mate and don't add any weed to it, and you're having a great drink. But now we add some cannabis extract to it, and we just amplify that euphoria a little bit. Put a little CBD in there as well, so that you get even out that anxiety you can get from just THC, so you can continue to perform. And now we have a drink that is still a drug, but could be functional and performance enhancing for a lot of athletes. And I definitely can get into that a little bit because I do think me myself playing basketball, there was times where I would dominate in practice, and then in the games I would get overcome by anxiety and start to get in my own head. And I started playing basketball under the influence of cannabis, and that eliminated all of that anxiety and fear I would feel. And I'm just focused on the task at hand. So that's why I still want to do a lot of research, or I want the brilliant minds that do this type of research to find out what kind of performance enhancing effects we could feel from cannabis in athletics specifically. And it'll still be a drug. And maybe one day it's viewed as a performance enhancing drug and it's illegal. But today we have a lot of athletes in the NBA and NFL that admit to using cannabis. So that definitely is something to say about high performance athletes and cannabis use.
I want to mention a couple of quick things that you talked about there, just to dive into. And I think we're just, after really talking about this like this, we're both kind of on the same page. I don't condone, like, I'm totally against smoking, period. Cigarettes, cigars,
That's a healthy
THC.
stance.
It's horrible for your cardiovascular system. It's not going to improve any kind of function as far as performance, period. After smoking, I couldn't tell you, like, I'll admit, like, full disclosure, everyone in their life has tried a joint once in their freaking life. And I felt it for days, like breathing. So, like, I don't do it, period. But, like, my point being is, like, you're gonna feel some kind of effects of smoking. I had a cigar, same thing, felt it for days in my lungs. I was like, this sucks. But anyway, I like a couple of points you talked about with knowing your dosage, and that's kind of what hit home with me, and which is why I think alcohol in a beer stance is so popular as opposed to liquor. A lot more people drink beer than that drink liquor. Liquor is unpredictable. You aren't measuring when you're taking it. You're just adding a lot, and it's a lot at once. Whereas beer, you can sit back, sip. You know exactly how much you're getting. Like, I went to Ireland last week as an example. I was telling you, like, I can have a Guinness. I know that's one drink. I know that's not going to have an effect on me or create any performance issues down the line as far as working out goes. So who cares? I want to sit there and enjoy a beer. I know exactly what it's doing to me and exactly how much alcohol is in it. And if you're offering something that's measurable, which I think is the key word you added in there, then I know as a consumer how much to have and know kind of where my limits are. If I want to stick to, okay, I want to enjoy it and get a little something out of it and not have any, like, have too much of something, like too much caffeine, I get, like, totally discombobulated and my blood pressure drops and it's crazy. So same thing with any kind of drug is sipping it to an extent is brilliant.
Yeah, yeah. So on in regards to can, what you just said there, that's one of the biggest challenges we've tried to solve. Is everyone knows at this point, not everybody, but people who have drank beer knows what a beer does to your body, right? And we definitely have different tolerance levels, but for the most part, universally, two beers, everybody was going to kind of feel the same way, depending on how much you usually drink, body weight, all kinds of things. But we know what that impairment feels like, so we don't have to measure a blood alcohol level. We just know what it does. In cannabis, it's so different in the effects different people feel. So we've really struggled with how do you make a cannabis drink that is the equivalent impairment of a beer. So can is very low dose. So this is our higher dose version, which is 5 milligrams of THC. But our core product has 2 milligrams of THC, 4 milligrams of CBD. I give that to people who have never consumed cannabis in their life, and I will tell them you'll be fine to drive home, because they'll feel it within 15 minutes. So, like, maybe give them an hour buffer to see how they exactly feel. But 2 milligrams of THC, you're going to feel a little nice, mellow happiness. And then the 4 milligrams of CBD evens out any anxiety you might feel. So it's designed to be a social high. We call it a social tonic. We don't call it a cannabis drink. Cannabis is the compounds that give you that social effect that people are used to with alcohol. So the can brand is never going to make anything too high dose, because we always want people to drink a can and not be too impaired. So we want can and designed can to be the equivalent, where a can is the same as a glass of wine, a cocktail, a measured cocktail, meaning like a shot, which is 1.5 ounce of liquor, not like one you're just pouring things and seeing what you end up with, or a beer. So if you have two beers and that's your level of comfort, then you can have two cans, and that should be your level of comfort. And a lot of people, my belief is, never going to graduate to something higher than that, and more power to them. Like, you don't want to need to have a lot of drugs ever. So if you just have a couple cans here and there to even out the buzz, or to be a little bit more social than you normally would be, or just to relax, I'm not going to say it's a health drink, but if you're stressed out just because of life, and maybe you're in a difficult stage of your life where you do need that little extra aid from drugs, then if you're decreasing cortisol in your system and decreasing stress out of your life, then that is a little bit healthier than just sitting there with all your stress and anxiety. Still need to be mindful of what's causing that stress. Maybe you're working three jobs to support your family and there's nothing you can do about it. So you do need a little bit of aid, and you shouldn't be shamed about it, but you're right. Like, you need to know what it does in your body.
Yeah, and I, even as an example, like I would never suggest to somebody that has never got drunk before or drank alcohol to go start drinking, because it's absolutely wonderful. I would say just don't do it. Same thing with this. If you
Yeah.
haven't done it before and you don't feel the need to, don't. And that's kind of a point we're kind of stress a point. It's not here to say go do something that you're not comfortable doing. It's still a drug, but if you are already and you want to, maybe it says, I love the instead of opioid example. If you need something instead of taking oxys or anything like Vitakin, like anything like that, I'd rather you take something like that in a measurable dose at a low dosage than go take something that you know is harmful to you. Like it's way worse. I'm so against opioids if you haven't told already.
Well, yeah. I
I'd
mean,
rather
there
you
are,
have a freaking beer when you're in pain than go have like some Vitamin. Like that's it.
yeah, yeah, and then I'll argue that cannabis drinks are healthier than alcohol. Uh, alcohol. So the reason Can was started is our founders were getting into their late 20s. They're older millennials like you and I, and they were hangovers were starting to get harder and harder to deal with the next day. So they still had a lot of responsibility, but they still wanted to go out and socialize with their friends, and all their friends drank. And all of us have been at the party or the event, especially around your family, where we're getting pressure to drink because everybody is pounding drinks, right? So this is another project that I'm working on, or it's already out. This is a cannabis beer, and it's a non-alc beer, not de-alked. And what's the difference? It was brewed in a hyper-controlled process where it never exceeded the ABV, alcohol by volume percentage, to be deemed alcoholic. So what is it basically? Fermented hop water. And if you ever had kombucha is fermented tea. So it's basically the same thing as a kombucha, where we add some cannabis to it. So now, somebody like me, I actually like the flavor of beer. I like the ritual of drinking. I like to be social. This looks like a beer, branded like a beer. I can drink this and I'm very happy. Whereas if I was drinking beers, I get bloated, and after two of them, and my sleep is going to be disrupted. If I drink too many, I'm going to get acid reflux. And then the hangovers just never, ever make it worth it for me anymore, because I have too many things to do. I never really get a day off anymore. So I think it's healthier than not only opioids, definitely agree there, but also alcohol as well.
Yeah, and I mean, we did a whole interview, and you obviously know them. You're the one who introduced me to them, but Athletic Brewing was on here a
Yes,
couple
sir.
times. So I appreciate the intro. This is the guy that set it up for me, but it's the same kind of scenarios. I have them in my fridge right now. So
They do great things, but yeah, they're positioning beer as a health drink, because beer are plant based drinks, right? Just like tea and kombucha, but the alcohol is what makes it unhealthy. Shout out to John Walker and the team there; they're doing great things.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely love them. So Paul, I just want to wrap this up real quick. So any like big message that you want to get across to people listening, because I know this is a very controversial topic. For example, I'm like 99% sure this is going to get banned on YouTube. So
I don't know about that. I have a lot of cannabis interviews on YouTube still up.
all right, so we're going to hope this doesn't, but just as my point, that's how much controversial it is. So
Yeah.
if there's any, is there a big take home message you want people to get from this?
Yeah, so at the end of the day, like, my passion is to educate people about cannabis and inspire them to learn more about it, because I firmly believe that everybody should be educated about what they're putting in their body, and everybody should have access to what they want to put in their body and make the best decisions for their health. As much as we've demonized opioids on this podcast, and they've definitely done a lot of harm in society, there are people that need them for different reasons, and I'm not an expert in why they need them or if there's better things, because it's fortunately I haven't been in a position where I need them. So I'm my passion and my mission in cannabis is to destigmatize the plant. I'm not saying it's a health plant. I'm not saying everybody should be consuming it at all. But it does help some people for very serious ailments, and it could reduce a lot of harm in people's life if they're taking it instead of something else, like I've already talked about. And I want to improve worldwide access. So more power to you if you never consume cannabis and you have no desire to it. But that doesn't mean somebody like me who does a lot of diligence and a lot of research before I decide to put things in my body shouldn't have access to that same plant. And it is still federally legal. At this point, I forget the exact count, but I want to say 28 states have some type of recreational cannabis program. So now it's a majority of the country thinks cannabis should be in society and in our lives and have some type of role to do it. But if we destigmatize cannabis and improve worldwide access for cannabis beverages, which is what I focus on, I think it will overtake alcohol. And I'm under a non-disclosure agreement, but I can't say who. In the past, I've advised some multinational alcoholic companies that are interested in this and are going to enter it. One I can talk about that I'm friends with, I never personally worked with them, but I've been to their headquarters, is Boston Beer Company, who has a product in Canada because it's federally legal there. Better believe the second it's federally legal in the US, they're going to do the same thing. I worked with Pabst Blue Ribbon, who has a product in California, cannabis product. And Vita Coco was also one of our clients who had a CBD product in Europe. So it's going to come into mainstream America, whether people like it or not. It's best just to educate yourself on it and give everybody the right to access it, because it could reduce a lot of harm in people's lives and help a lot of people. But it's important to not overhype the plant and make irresponsible claims out of greed or monetary gains. We just need to give humans the right and the access to have things that could benefit their lives and improve their overall health and fitness goals.
Love it. And then how can people find you, get a hold of you? How can they learn more about the company?
Yeah, so the company, drinkcan.com is our website. You can get a hold of me, send me an email, Paulo, Paulo, at drinkcan.com. And I'm on that every day. So definitely respond to there. I'm also on LinkedIn where I do most of my writing about cannabis advocacy and policy. So you can search for my name there as well.
Well, thank you so much for coming on. And thank you guys for listening to this week's episode of Health and Fitness Redefined. Don't forget, hit that subscribe button and join us next week as we dive deeper into this ever-changing field. And remember, fitness is medicine. Until next time. For us, we know what it's like to feel unhealthy, depressed, and downright defeated. We want to show others there is a right way. And through fitness, you could do anything you set your mind to. Fitness can give you that motivation, confidence, energy you need to bridge that mental gap and prevent you from missing important life events. We understand it's about feeling better, living longer, and being good examples for our kids. We understand this because we live it. And for us, that's the redefined difference.